The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Less than 1 year has passed since I first stood at this podium. Each day since, we have gone forward with a clear vision and a righteous mission to make America great again for all Americans. So let's begin tonight by recognizing that the state of our union is strong.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Wednesday, January 31st, 2018. And the voice that you just heard was, of course, that of your president, President Donald J. Trump, at his first State of the Union address. And, you know, it was a masterpiece of oxymoronic statements. He was simultaneously calling for unity and bipartisanship while saying things that were so divisive and hyper-partisan and things that were pandering to his white nationalist crowd and his white supremacist base. And as you would expect, some of the biggest applause lines came when he touted his accomplishment on tax reform and gutting the core of Obamacare, which is the individual mandate.
We enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history. We repealed the core of the disastrous Obamacare. The individual mandate is now gone. Thank heaven.
I mean, they lost their mind on that part. That was like, you know, everything that they ever hoped for. And particularly on the tax bill, right? So the tax bill is genuinely a Republican conservative idea. So it makes sense for them to cheer for that. But the individual mandate being repealed, the individual mandate is a Republican idea. It is the core of Romneycare, the core of the Heritage Foundation's original idea on how we fix health care for all Americans. And they simply cheered this, the destruction of one of their own ideas. They cheered this as a hyper-partisan celebration because they got to undo what Obama did. Obama instituted or got passed and signed into law a conservative idea. But it wasn't so much about the idea for Republicans. It was about beating Obama. And it's amazing that Trump never ceases to amaze me with his ability to go one step further than he has ever gone before. He has this ability to always go further into the most ridiculous and dangerous ideas. I want you to take a listen into this clip that went under the radar for some people, but it set off my alarms when I first heard it because it's essentially asking for loyalty oaths and giving the cabinet members the ability to hire and fire, reward and fire those people who are essentially loyal and unloyal, or disloyal rather. And the question is what is the definition that he's going for here? Because it sounds like to me, when you hear this clip, tell me if it sounds like it to you, this is the recipe for a purge.
So tonight I call on Congress to empower every cabinet secretary with the authority to reward good workers and to remove federal employees who undermine the public trust or fail the American people.
I mean, it's not as though the federal employees have tenure like universities or like some high schools. And so it's not as though these cabinet members don't already have great leverage, latitude to be able to get rid of employees who aren't doing their jobs. So this is a straw man, but it's a straw man to introduce something far more nefarious. This is, you know, how do you define Donald Trump? How do you define betraying the public trust or betraying the trust? You know, what are the specific things that you put in there? Because it all boils down to definitions. And I'm mighty afraid that this entire 20 seconds of a clip is really focused on the purge that they're trying to start at the Department of Justice. You already had the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, on yesterday say that we need to cleanse. We need to cleanse the FBI. Right. And to be clear, like, I don't have to give this caveat, but I think it's important for us to be able to do two things simultaneously, to understand the context, the culture, and the nature of what the FBI is and was, specifically what it was and how it treated the black community, how it infiltrated the black community, how it was complicit in flooding the black community with drugs, with killing some of our leaders. There are things about the FBI that it deserves to pay for. Right. But simultaneously, let's understand clearly that Donald Trump is not giving two rats ass about any of those things that the FBI did to the black community and to other communities. Donald Trump only cares about purging the FBI to prevent or to stop or at least invalidate this investigation into alleged collusion and into obstruction of justice. And so we have to simultaneously be able to say two things. Number one, the FBI has done some dirty things and is still doing some dirty things, but this is not the reason that Donald Trump is opposing them. Donald Trump is opposing the FBI and wants to purge the FBI and the Department of Justice because they are after him, or they are at least investigating him on, in particularly the Department of Justice and the special counsel Bob Mueller for alleged collusion with Russia. And so we can't allow this. My favorite word for the last couple of months has been shorthand. We can't allow this shorthand in our analysis to allow Donald Trump to get away with the things that he's trying to do. He is quite honestly moving towards a dictatorial regime. Honestly, and all of his predilections are moving him towards that. He's not used to people being able to tell him no. If you think about it, it's just the culture of corporate America. Corporate America does have quite an authoritarian leadership structure. So let's be clear. It's not to say that he's Hitler. It's to say that he's bringing and introducing elements into our government that are not conducive or that are not conducive to democracy. And so we can't allow this shorthand analysis to say, oh, the FBI was bad in the 60s and they were bad in the 70s. Yes, they were. They're bad today on some of the things. Matter of fact, I have a story I'm working on with the Department of Justice where COINTELPRO didn't go anywhere. It just has transformed. But we can't allow that to be a shorthand to say that anyone who's attacking the FBI is on our side, or we should stand back and allow them to attack the FBI and the Department of Justice because of what they did in the past. No, if the crime that Donald Trump, let's peradventure Donald Trump is guilty of a crime, right? Let's posit that for a second. Do we sit by and say, well, the FBI is, complicit in the murder of Dr. King, so we should absolutely just sit back and let Donald Trump get away with his crime because of what the FBI did to Dr. King? No, that's ridiculous. That's absurd. And that's something that we can't allow to enter into our analysis. And if it does come into our analysis, we need to think critically about it. Now, that being said, this entire 20 seconds of the State of the Union last night, I think, is aimed towards the Department of Justice and the FBI, which ironically are under the leadership of Republicans. I outlined this on my show yesterday afternoon, like it or not. I outlined it that this entire charade around the Nunes memo is really a Republican memo that was written that implicates a Republican appointee, Rod Rosenstein, of improperly extending a FISA warrant to surveil a former Republican campaign advisor, Carter Page, who worked for the Republican president of the United States, Donald Trump. This is a Republican starting a purge of a Republican, and it's all nothing more than to create the specter of the deep state and to give the illusion that Donald Trump is fighting against the deep state in the United States of America. And because people are so ridiculous and some of their supporters are so intentionally obtuse, which is just a really nice way of saying that they're dumb as F, they are allowing this to go on. And this language that slid by so many people, it slid by, but I believe that he's directly talking about getting rid of people who are not loyal. Listen again.
So tonight I call on Congress to empower every cabinet secretary with the authority to reward good workers and to remove federal employees who undermine the public trust or fail the American people.
Yeah, so we're not dealing with teachers with tenure that can't be fired. And so they have to pass legislation that allows school districts to fire bad teachers. This is the type of jargon that he's using. But in reality, what's a good worker, Donald Trump? That's what's critical. All right. So then he went on and amazed me even more, because while he's simultaneously saying that we need to unify and that we need to make America great for everybody, he really spat on the faces of everyone, particularly dreamers. Listen to this fool.
My duty and the sacred duty of every elected official in this chamber is to defend Americans, to protect their safety, their families, their communities, and their right to the American dream. Because Americans are dreamers too.
Get the hell out of here, you racist Stephen Miller driven piece of this. Americans are dreamers too. Clearly he's saying, this is America first, right? This is part and parcel with his American first ideology. But this is also a slap in the face of the dreamers, and the dreamers that he's getting ready to, he has created a problem for, an existential problem for. Many of them are going to have to go back to nations from which they don't have any experience. They have no time spent there. And Donald Trump created this problem. And now he's standing in front of the entire nation, the entire House of Representatives, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the cabinet members, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of America watching, all of the international community watching, and he throws it in their face and says, forget about dreamers. Dreamers aren't that important, because you know what? Americans are dreamers too. I mean, this is some next level bigotry here. This is to say, this really spits in the face of dreamers. This spits in the face of everyone who's fighting on their behalf. And Donald Trump knew that. And Republicans just cheered it on. This is exactly the type of rhetoric, the red meat that they want. This wasn't a dog whistle. This was a bullhorn. This was shouting to all of the white nationalists across the country that forget about dreamers. Everybody has everyone has so much emotional concern for dreamers. Forget about dreamers, because Americans are dreamers too. I don't know whose voice that was, but that's just what came out. But the point is that this is a flag of white supremacy being waved right there in the halls of Congress, in the House chamber. And I mean, don't get it wrong. We've had that before, but simply because we had it before, does that suggest that we should not stop it from happening again? In the back of my mind, I'm thinking of people who always like to draw false equivalences and say things like, oh, this is not the first time white supremacy has been standing behind the podiums, giving the State of the Union address. Okay, fine. Do you want us to not say anything about it now because it's always been? That is the most ludicrous position to give. Whataboutisms? Just ridiculous. This is white supremacy being waved for the entire world to see, saying that we don't care about children and young adults who are Americans in every sense of the word. They are Americans. But Americans are dreamers too. So let's not worry about dreamers, and let's create hurdles for them to get their citizenship. Let's create a problem that did not have to be created simply because we wanted to undo what Barack Obama did with the deferred action for childhood arrivals for DACA. And let's satiate the ultra bigoted gene of that bald-headed, what is he, like 30 years old? And I mean, he has like a hairline of George Jefferson, Stephen Miller. I mean, unfortunately, he can't shave it all off like me and just go bald in a stylish fashion, because he would just look like the true skinhead that he is. Everything else that the president said was somewhere between absurd and just empty platitudes of nothingness. And so that would be my summary. That's my summary of the president's State of the Union address. Nothing surprising except for his ability to continuously surprise us with absurdity, bigotry, and ridiculousness.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute privilege to join you all tonight. We are here in Fall River, Massachusetts, a proud American city.
All right. Yeah, here we go. Let me get my popcorn. We've got the Democratic response from Joe Kennedy III. III. All right, this is going to be great because, he has the legacy of the Kennedy name. And, he went to Harvard. He studied underneath Elizabeth Warren. And, he's a pretty good speaker. So, yeah, he's going to definitely get Donald Trump. He's going to put Donald Trump in his place. Remember that viral video he did and where he was like, he was going off. So I know after hearing that mess that Donald Trump just got through saying, all those very specific policy things that Donald Trump wants to do to hurt Americans, I just know that Joe Kennedy is getting ready to rip this thing to shreds.
Many have spent the last year anxious, angry, afraid. We all feel the fractured fault lines across our country.
Okay, okay, so he's going to go with he's going to go with the soft approach, because Donald Trump is so bombastic. He's going to go with the, mellow approach. But he's definitely, I'm not sure what that low frequency hum is in their setup there, but I can ignore that. And I'm not really sure. What is that around his mouth? That's a little unnerving, but I can look past that because he's getting ready to talk some real substance. Okay.
We see an economy that makes stocks soar, investor portfolios bulge, and corporate profits climb, but fails to give workers their fair share of the reward.
Yes, he's getting ready to talk about income inequality, which is strange because he's like he inherited $16 million. But it's totally cool because it's not impossible for rich people to actually care about income inequality. So he's setting it up. Here we go. He's going to give us a solution.
A Justice Department rolling back civil rights by the day.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you, but you just kind of breezed by a very important subject, Joe. I mean, the Justice Department is led by the white supremacist Keebler Elf looking dude. But, let's not just list the problems, right?
Hatred and supremacy proudly marching in our streets. Bullets tearing through our classrooms, concerts, and congregations, targeting our safest, sacred places. And this nagging, sinking feeling, no matter your political beliefs, that this is not right. This is not who we are.
Okay. Joe, it's white supremacy. It's not just supremacy, it's white supremacy. It's a very specific type of supremacy that, and you have some very intentional pauses that become noticeable, especially when I'm editing this video or this podcast, and I can look at the waveforms and see that you have about a 1 second pause in between your pauses, in between your words. This is who America is. The problem is that we haven't really fixed America in general. We just pushed it to the background. Everything that you listed is true, but you didn't list a single solution or a single policy remedy to fix those things. And you took the excitement of the moment that we needed someone to be a champion to fight back against. See, I'm going to talk calmly too, because that's how he talked. We needed a champion to fight back against Donald Trump. And you talked very methodically, and you thought very intentionally about what you wanted to say, and you had the look of sincerity in your eyes. I'm not quite sure if that was too much chapstick or if that was drool coming out the side of your mouth, but it was very distracting. I would be lying if I didn't mention it. You have the right last name, and I just know from last night that you're not the guy to lead the Democratic Party or the leftist movement to the future. You're not. I'm sorry, champ. I'm sorry. You have been hit with the curse of the State of the Union follies, the response follies. I mean, Joe Kennedy became a meme overnight. There were so many memes about the stuff around his mouth. And listen, hey, let's be real. Let's be real in this sense. the Democratic Party would be more upset about the stuff around his mouth than they would have been at his speech. His speech was a mountain of platitudes. It was it was nothingness. I'm sorry. I want to like the guy. I like the Kennedys, never mind the problem. Everybody has a problem. Everybody's problematic, but in general, I like the Kennedys, right? And so you kind of hope that this guy was going to do a good job, or at least be willing to give him a chance. Never mind the fact that he takes money from Big Pharma and opposes marijuana. I know all the problems with them, but the chances of us getting a candidate that's going to be exactly what we want progressively. I mean, Bernie Sanders isn't even progressive enough for some of you guys. So, I don't engage in the purity test. I wanted to see if he had the temerity to actually go up against Donald Trump in this era. And I'm sorry, he doesn't. This guy does not have what it takes to go head to head with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is like the boss at the end of a game. He's the big boss. He's the level 12 boss. And I'm sorry, but Joe Kennedy is on level 3. That's the best way to describe it. And this is not a time for nicely timed, perfectly phrased, sincere puppy dog eyes trying to convey sincerity through your eyes, when in actuality, sincerity doesn't have to try to be conveyed. It's just there. Right? Passion doesn't have to be conjured up. It doesn't have to have pauses in between to try to suggest that you're thinking so deeply about what you're saying and that you're trying to let it resonate with the people. No, passion can be conveyed in an imperfect fashion. It doesn't have to come from the perfectly groomed, perfectly pedigreed, perfectly, dressed and perfectly phrased, heir to the Kennedy throne, to anyone's throne. And that's not what America is looking for right now. And I don't know if the Democratic Party got the message, but they should have got the message last night, because Joe Kennedy became a meme overnight. And people are trying their best. They're trying their damnedest to say, oh, it was a brilliant speech. No, it wasn't. It really wasn't, in the sense that it was not a brilliant speech in the sense that it did not serve the time that it needed to serve. It did not serve the purpose that it needed to serve. He did not hit the notes that we needed. We need a fighter. We need a roughneck. We need a woman who can get in there, who could tear this shit apart and rip Donald Trump to shreds, simultaneously inspiring us, not by giving inspirational speeches, but by saying what needs to be said. Sometimes what needs to be said is ugly. And sometimes what needs to be said is visceral. And it's not, we don't get inspiration just by imitating Obama. Come on. Somebody send these people a memo. We don't need a Joel Osteen, right? This is what he reminded me of more than anything else. He reminded me of a Joel Osteen, the preacher out of Texas, the mega church. And I'm like, that's exactly what we do not need. Because we're not at an inspirational time. We're at a time where it's time to fight. And instead, we've got the guy who knows the power of a pause, and the guy who knows the sincerity of the puppy dog eyes, and who knows the right words to say and try to strike the right chord of unity and solidarity, and knows the problems because he outlines the problems, and he knows about the hatred. And in a minute, he's going to remind me more of Jim Kirk than he is anyone else from Star Trek, because of how short his words were and how I hate to give the guy a hard time, but I gave the guy a good shot, and I just know he does not have what it takes for what we need to do right now. Sorry, Joe. You weren't as bad as Marco Rubio, but you did replace his water meme with the chapstick meme. That's all I have to say about that. The third speech of the night that needs analysis is that of Bernie Sanders. And yeah, I decided to just keep it real with you all. I'm going to lose a lot of fans because of this, but That's never stopped me before. I watched about 45 seconds of Bernie Sanders' speech and I cut it off. You know why? Because I like Bernie. And I've heard Bernie so many times, and I've yet to hear anything new from Bernie. And this is not to say that it wasn't a good speech. I'm sure it was a great speech, but I don't need to hear from Bernie Sanders. I don't, because not only because I know what he's going to say, but because I need to hear from Bernie Sanders' heir apparent or the entire team. Bernie Sanders did that. It was good that he did it, because we need those spaces to be crafted out so that an alternative can be heard. Let me establish that. It was good that he did it, and I don't begrudge him doing it. I just was like, I heard what he was saying. I'm like, okay, I can go to bed because I got to get up the next morning. But would not it have been great if Bernie Sanders used that as an opportunity to introduce the next person? That would have been phenomenal. I mean, that person could not have done it without Bernie Sanders. Let's be clear, right? They could have, the same exact infrastructure could have tried to put up their next person, and very few people would have tuned in. Bernie Sanders has the popularity that's needed. But that's the thing. It's like, we need Bernie Sanders to pass that crown on, to at least share it or spread it and try to find someone who can replace him when his time is done. And if we keep continuing to depend on Bernie Sanders to be the light of the progressive movement or the hope of America, and we don't have anyone to replace him, then what happens when he dies? And if Bernie Sanders and his team don't actively start propping up other people now, or at least creating the platform for multiple people to use and let the people decide for themselves. This is not to say that Bernie Sanders needs to find to anoint an heir. It's to say, expose us to other people, Bernie, and allow us to find that person for ourselves. But, and I get it. I get it. Bernie Sanders is great. He is. He's amazing. He is. He says the right things, has the right policy on most things. He does. I'm with you on that. But the Democratic Party introduced their replacement last night. They're next in line. And, it didn't go too well for them, as you could tell by the last segment. But, we're just recycling Bernie. And I don't know if people get what I'm saying, because a lot of people get upset when I say that we need someone else besides Bernie Sanders. People take that personally, and people just hear me all kind of ways backwards, and they are interpreting it as I am championing the Democrat, the establishment structure, which I'm most certainly not. What I'm saying is the truth, and nobody can tell me that it's wrong, because it's not ageism. It's time. Time is not on Bernie Sanders' side. And because it's not on his side, it's not on our side. We need to hear from other people in the progressive movement. So the 45 seconds of Bernie Sanders' speech that I heard were great. He has the passion. He knows the problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But still, it's besides the point. The point is that if we don't quickly start elevating alternative voices of our bench, everyone who sent me names this week said that these are the people who are on the progressive bench. Okay, we could have heard from any number of them last night. And that was the time and the place and the platform. The Democratic Party, think of it this way. The Democratic Party, and all of its flaws and all the things that it does wrong, it did one thing phenomenally right last night. You know what it did right? It gave the stage to someone different. Now, that person didn't do necessarily a great job. I mean, he gave a speech and it was fine, but it just, empty platitudes, et cetera, et cetera. But the Democratic Party gave a national platform to someone different. Here's what the Democratic Party did wrong. All there's talk about trusting black women and supporting black women and people of color. And they just went with, a familiar name, white guy. They did that wrong. But the progressive movement led by Bernie Sanders did something very wrong last night, too. They did not offer us anybody new. And considering, I don't even have to say this again. I hope you guys can get this. I'm a fan of Bernie Sanders, but I just know the longevity is not on his side. And it's not about, it is about his age, but it's more about the need. If Bernie Sanders dies, without having established and given voice to the next generation of progressive leaders, we are starting from scratch. Bernie, who everybody still loves, the most popular politician in the United States of America, who probably can run in 2020 and do fine. But if Bernie dies without creating a system that replicates him and replicates new leadership to replace him after he's gone, do you guys realize we're starting from scratch in so many ways? We need to leverage the popularity of Bernie Sanders. And honestly, he needs to do this. He needs to take that notoriety, that popularity, and create a platform for a list of people, not just one, but to create the stage for other people. Bernie TV should not be, I don't watch it enough, but the only ones I ever see is Bernie Sanders. Maybe there are other voices that are put on Bernie TV. I don't know, because only people I ever see come out of it is Bernie Sanders. And I think it's his responsibility. I do think it's his responsibility because he has galvanized the movement. He has been propelled to the front of the progressive movement. Progressives have lifted him up on our shoulders, $27 at a time, and we have carried Bernie to this point. And it is by virtue of all the work that he's done. I'm not negating anything that he's done, but what I'm saying is that the progressive movement needs him to elevate other voices and elevate them in a way that they have a fighting chance of becoming contenders on the national stage. There's nothing wrong with creating the platform and letting someone else use it. That's quite literally what I do here at Progressive Army. I'm creating a platform and I'm just begging other people to use it and utilize it and run with it. And then what I'm doing in the background is I'm making the platform bigger. I'm growing it bigger and bigger and bigger, doing all the things that I need to do to make sure that the people who are on my squad can get heard even better. If we don't replicate ourselves, I'm going to use some religious jargon here, right? There's no, this is what they say in churches. There's no success without a successor. There is no success without a successor. And without Bernie Sanders having a lineup of successors and giving them an opportunity to be seen, to be heard, to be vetted, to be smoked over, to be ridiculed, to be criticized, to have articles written about them, without giving them the chance to do that while Bernie Sanders is still alive, means that we have to start from scratch after he dies. I hope you guys feel me on that. If you don't, I love you anyway. I don't care, but I love you. I love you. All right. Take care of yourselves. Go to patreon.com/the BPD show. Become a patron. See you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.